Hello and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Cue the music. Okay, I have a completely irrelevant thing that has nothing to do with Frankenstein, but it's very important and good news in this time of trial, I feel.
Yeah,
which is that I took a U quiz this morning about which queer problematic trope am I, and I got queer-coded villain, and this is the highest achievement of the pandemic for me.
See, I took that quiz and I got flirting with everybody, and I don't think that's very fair since I haven't seen anybody in the last year.
I felt I need to do this quiz.
And be the control group.
Yeah, I can be the control group, yeah.
I feel like that is actually a segue into this whole thing, you know, queer-coded villain. You got the monster, he's cast out from society, he doesn't have anyone like him to look at, and he's alone, and he just wants a friend. There's a link in there, maybe.
Well, there was also the whole, why is everybody in this book gay for Frankenstein?
I know.
Like, how hot is this man that everybody is just like, I will ignore the atrocities because you seem hot as shit. Like, that's what?
He's just an arrogant undergrad. It's just like, if you like Frankenstein, just go to Cambridge. They're a penny.
I promise you, half the STEM departments, that's just, there he is.
That is how it is. Can confirm.
What would your guys' terrible summary be?
I only have memes.
I mean, mine was basically... Man makes monster kills someone, man runs away to Swiss Alps and describes them for ages, still doesn't acknowledge his problems, runs away with BF to England, monster kills BF, floats on a boat to Ireland, brackets, why, go home, everyone he loves dies.
Woman inherits the earth.
I mean, that's it, basically, yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only person whose brain went to Jurassic Park, because
exactly.
Your scientists were so concerned about whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think about whether they should.
Oh, yeah. We can do comparative lit with Jurassic Park, absolutely.
Oh my god, we so should.
Especially when the Jurassic World, the new ones, where it's like, these dinosaurs are being used for like warfare. There's some juicy stuff in there. My terrible summary would basically be like up 1800s Tony Stark unprepared for fatherhood.
Local mad scientist experiences a consequence. What happens next won't astonish you at all.
He's just like, he creates, okay, so there's weird stuff in this book before we even get to the whole I stitched a person together out of other dead people and it was alive.
Like, if you needed a clue that Frankenstein was an unreliable narrator, the fact that he never explicitly explains that he is grave robbing for this.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like, okay.
The thing I want to make clear before we talk about the actual Frankenstein bits of this book is that he has this sister, but she's not really his sister. And so in the first edition of the book, she is a cousin who lives in the same house as him and is raised by his parents, like her aunt and uncle. In the 1831 revision, she is like an orphan that his family just like
steal.
They see this peasant family and they have this. They have like 3 swarthy, like sturdy children and 1 beautiful blonde waif, and they go, "This child is white, we must have her." And just take and just take her. They're just like, "Hey, can we have her?" And the peasant family is just like, "She's going to have a better life with you than with us." And anyway, so at the age of 5, Victor Frankenstein has this sister, essentially, that he's raised with, an adoptive sister in all intents and purposes. And then his parents are just like, "By the way, you guys are going to get married when you're older." But they're raised as siblings,
which I find so problematic.
Like literally, they bring the blonde waif home and they're like, "Here, Frankenstein, we brought you a gift."
Oh my god, that was so annoying. It's like, she's yours now.
And that explains everything you need to know about his personality. Like, Yeah, it's awful.
And like, nobody thinks this is weird. What is going on?
I tell you what, that's something that, like, I didn't get until I got to the very end, right? Because, I mean, this is, like, textbook unreliable narrator, right? But you're kind of, everybody kind of has the gist of the story, right? Like, idiot mad scientist is irresponsible with his creations and then murder.
Yeah.
And so I was reading the sort of the preamble to the monster creation, kind of going, okay, let's look for the signs in his childhood. Where is this coming from? You know, how did this happen to him? And I couldn't really see anything, you know? I was kind of like, oh, he's just a bit into science. He's a bit obsessed with things. All right, okay, whatever. And then you get to the end and he's like, I am utterly blameless in all of this. And you go, oh, The reason why you can't tell what happened to go wrong is because he's telling you the story. And he's spoiled as like,
yes.
This is it, is that he's all like, oh, my family loved me, everybody was so generous, I had these friends, but like, only 2, mark you, but he had friends.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, oh, okay, you think this is normal.
That makes so much more sense because, like, I had not read this book before. I'd only heard of Frankenstein from pop culture, as in the Halloween guy with the bolt through the neck. And so when it starts as somebody not called Frankenstein pootling off to the Arctic for basically no good reason whatsoever. And I'm like, okay, what the bloody hell's going on? And then they just save this emancipated Victor Frankenstein, who's been in pursuit of some other guy. Like, literally, they basically see this monster.
I found a beautiful man on an ice floe, and now I'm keeping him. No take backs.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, and also, so basically, this first guy, this Robert Walton guy, is writing to his sister. This entire story,
and he's such a mirror for Frankenstein as well.
Yeah.
In real life, how weird must it be if you're like, oh, I got a letter from my brother as he goes off to the Arctic, and it's like, what the is this? Like,
and it's like, inside it, you have the first Gothic novel, and you're like, oh boy, okay.
and then it just, and I mean, also, a just complete side note. So I listened to the audiobook, which is read by Dan Stevens, the dude from Downton.
Oh, yeah.
And right, yeah.
He is also in a very good horror movie called, I think, Apostle. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, like, what because he read Victor Frankenstein, I don't know why I'm laughing. Because he read Victor Frankenstein, like, so, Victor sounded so miserable about everything, just all the time about everything. And then when Henry would turn up, Henry being his friend.
Clerval, yeah.
Boyfriend,
like, yeah, because just... Listeners, I zoned out about halfway through this audiobook. I zoned back in, and Victor was talking about somebody. I was like, oh, he must be talking about Elizabeth, because it's unlike he's talking about Henry. And then it was like, oh, he's talking about Henry. And I was, oh, right, yeah, so nobody's hiding this at all. And
it's like, just, wife or best friend? Wife or best friend? Like the Brooklyn Nine-Nine game, dog or wife or dog.
Yes,
it's like, you can't tell.
It's like, who is it?
To be fair, like, you should be friends with your spouse.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe not surrogate siblings.
Maybe you should just have 2 spouses if you love them both.
I mean, that is also fine, but I guess when was this published? 1818? I mean,
yeah.
He would have been so much happier if he got married to Henry. Let's be honest. Where was I going with this? I can't remember. Oh no, Dan Stevens reading the audiobook. That was it. And so he'd be really miserable as Victor, being like, woe betide me, that my monster who I made, which is not my problem, has killed a child. And then Henry just turns up, like the equivalent of a golden Labrador, just be like, hi guys, I've come to help. And it's such a like step change in the audiobook. And it's my only other final point about the audiobook is, I think, as I mentioned in my little summary, that basically Victor goes on an interrailing trip and chases his monster around Europe. And
that's his gap year.
It's basically his, like, you know when you have that year between if you decide to do an undergrad and do a master's, that's it. This is Victor's, right? He's just going on an interrailing trip. He gets to Europe, and then he gets in a boat and decides to float across off the sea and ends up in Ireland. However, I can't say Dan Stevens' Irish accent was particularly telling to be Northern Irish, because I was like, is he in Scotland? Is he in the Shetland Islands? Oh, he's in Northern Ireland, right. And also the weird thing is, it is the only time he does an accent. Oh, sorry, not an accent, but like...
You mean he wasn't trying to do a Genovese accent for Victor Frankenstein the whole time?
No, but like everybody, even when he met anybody else who was like in France or Switzerland, they'd all have an RP English accent, apart from these people in Northern Ireland. I'm like...
Maybe he was like, it will be too offensive to the Irish if we imply that they have British accents.
I've got to say, I do enjoy their reaction to him washing up and assuming they're English. Because he's just like, oh, I thought the English were more hospitable to strangers, and all of these very angry Irish people are just like,
what did you say to me?
I genuinely thought he'd ended up in Sweden. I think I got my geography like completely cocked up, and I thought he went across the North Sea. It's like, oh, maybe he's in Sweden or Norway or something. Then
he's on the wrong side of
Scotland.
And I was like, oh,
no, maybe he went out. And then I got my geography right. I was like, no, maybe he's drifted up to like, you know, the Outer Hebrides or something. It's like, no, he's in Ireland. I was like, no, wouldn't have got that from the accent. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling about that. But
I want to jump back to talking about the narrators, actually, because that was something that Eli was saying, that you pick it up and our first narrator, Walton, who is up there on the hubris scale. We should play Rate My Hubris later. But he's like, oh, I'm going to hire a ship. I feel like, as a very clever person, I'm entitled to an amazing discovery. So either I'm going to find the Northwest Passage or I'm going to solve magnets. And you're like, okay, my dude. Okay.
Chill.
Anyway, what I wanted to say was basically that I find it very interesting that we get 3 narrators in this, nested, unreliable narrators, right? Mm-hmm. And all of them are basically Frankenstein.
Yeah.
If you compare, individually, each of them is a mirror to and a type of Frankenstein, right? They're they don't all share the same traits. I don't think the monster is the creature, since that's how he's usually referred to in the book, is always about the hubris in the way that Walton and Frankenstein are. But they have so much in common, and you're kind of like, oh, I see how this, and it plays into the whole, they're all very isolated people.
Well, it comes up time and again how they all just want a friend, somebody to share thoughts with and to share existence with.
Yeah, they want friends or family, yeah.
But they're actually really bad at reaching out to people. It's really funny to me because there are moments where you think they've learned something, right? There's a moment after he's made the creature where Frankenstein's kind of looking back on it as he's telling the story and going, let me tell you, all the evil in the world is to do with people getting so caught up in one thing that they abandon all bonds of affection. That's a sign that you've gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
Does he ever, after that, once ask anybody for help?
No.
He doesn't. I think one of the notes I made was just Victor needs to stop running away from his problems and actually talk about them, because he just... what is it? His mother dies of scarlet fever, and then he just gets all absorbed by his experiments to sort of deal with his grief. And reads loads of old books on chemistry, and then decides to try and replicate bits of the human body by grave robbing, nicking a load of bodies and knitting them together to make this creature, which then comes alive. And he's like, oh, this looks ugly, and then runs off. When the monster first kills a child, and this girl is up for the murder of this child, and she's innocent.
Yeah, the creature intentionally framed the girl for what it's worth. You find that out later.
And it's the creature's framed this child for the murder of another child. I think, is his little brother? Is it William?
Yeah.
Is his little brother?
Yeah, it's Victor's little brother, William, and the girl who's been framed is a servant who's also part of the family, sort of, but it's very... It reminded me of... Anyway, I want to make a comparison about Justine later, but continue telling the story.
No. It was basically that Victor knows that it's the monster. He knows that she is... clearly hasn't done it. And he's like, well, I'm just not going to do anything about this. It'll be fine, right? It won't be,
if I was honest about this, it might help, but I'm a coward, so I won't.
I'm complete whip. And then he gets later on where he gets charged with murder of this body that the people in Ireland have found, and he's like, oh, now I finally can empathise with this poor child that earlier on was put up for a murder that she didn't do.
Yeah, also, I felt like that incident was really illuminating as well, because he kind of goes into... There's 2 points I want to make about the Justine thing, which is, firstly, he goes in with the assumption that because Justine didn't do it, she will obviously be found innocent, so he doesn't have to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And when
he has this faith in the justice system,
but
which comes from
he has
entirely
faith
from privilege.
In the justice system from the position of a rich white man, right? Because
exactly.
He's gone into when you see him in Ireland, he is in a lot of ways a much worse off. I think they do have evidence that he was on the Orkneys when the guy died, so there is more evidence in the he definitely has an alibi as opposed to Justine. Yeah. But the fact is that he literally says he killed him multiple times. He literally says he is the murderer, a murderer of many people, multiple times, and he still gets acquitted.
Yep.
Right? He's
because
just allowed to walk out fancy free. But that's why, isn't it? He's never thought about what that looks like from another person. He's like, oh, if it were me, obviously I would just be able to walk free instantly. So he's just, and he just assumes it'll be the same for Justine, and it's very much not. And secondly, there's he argues that people will think he's mad if he tells them about the monster, the creature, sorry.
Which they would.
Which, I mean, they would, but also it's funny to me that, like, he says that then when he has a reputation for being, like, you know, an upstanding, reasonable gentleman. He's like, oh, it definitely wouldn't work here. There's nothing I could do. And when he eventually tries it, it's after he's been institutionalized for, essentially for having a breakdown. And then he goes to a magistrate and is like, I assumed that my noble air of, like, fierce martyrdom or whatever would ennoble me to this guy, and he'd instantly just listen to everything I had to say. And you're like, okay, but you do realize that you just, like, yeah, these are different circumstances. You can be all like, oh, I was justified in, like, thinking that they would think I was mad, so I didn't say anything the first time, because they did think he was mad the second time. But the second time, he'd literally been in an asylum for, like, months before he goes to the magistrate. You're like, these are not the same thing. These are not the same thing.
The comparison I wanted to make with Justine was, so remember in Perilous Life of JDO, there's this bit where Hardy and Diana are just like, oh, come and live with us. We can put it out that you're one of the... But you'll be really, you'll be one of the family, but you'll be sort of a servant or a governess or whatever. That's how Justine is. It's like there's this child that they basically adopt because her parents are awful. Her father dies and her mother hates her. So they take her in, but she has to be a servant to them. That's like the deal. And it's it's just really this really strange dynamic.
Victor goes on this whole rant about how, like, oh, you know, we were of an enlightened people who didn't think servants were less than us. So she was doing, you know, she was basically family to us. Being our servant wasn't a degrading or humiliating what's it at all.
You know what else it reminds me of? Knives Out.
Yes.
It does. Like, I think the other thing that I say surprised me, I mean, I know this is a book written by Mary Shelley when she's in a house with a load of other romantic poets and writers at the time. But what surprised me was just how flowery the language was. Not in a sense of, like...
Well, a lot of that is due to her husband, actually. A lot of the purple prose.
It was kind of like... You know when you're at school and you're writing a descriptive writing piece and they're like, I'm going to throw the thesaurus at this and get all the clever, not long words, but make it sound clever because you've only got, you know, 2 pages to make a convincing story to your English teacher that you can actually, you know, write creatively. That is what this felt like.
And you start using words like nefarious and whatever. You turn into Lemony Snicket.
He kept saying the word occupation. He was like, my occupation of this, my occupation of the creature, my occupation. I'm like, just, I literally nearly started to get a tally going of how many times he used the word occupation.
I honestly didn't enjoy the prose that much. It was very purple prose, and I don't know how much of that. So I was reading about this, and there was a lot of, like, her husband, Percy Shelley, like, made alterations. Apparently there was one line that was by the creature saying, like, I do not wish to hate you, and he changed that to, like, I refuse to set myself in opposition to thee, or whatever.
Yeah, and it's just...
I know, and I really don't get on with, like, purple prose unless it's for a specific narrative purpose, and in this case it isn't. It's just how the writing is, and I'm going to be honest, my eyes glazed over a lot of, like, Victor's descriptions of the travel from Geneva up to Scotland. I'm just like, let me get to the part where you're cutting up dead bodies, please.
Okay, I'm gonna put in a dissenting opinion here. I actually really liked the prose. I found it very readable, and part of what I liked about it was I feel like, and so I don't have a lot of very well formed opinions on this because I did end up kind of rush reading it last night. But one of the things that I could really tell was that there was something it had to say about the nature civilization dichotomy and nature versus nurture, and. One of the things that it seemed to be really pushing, and it's the only place in which I actually found Frankenstein, or the monster, honestly, in a lot of ways, at all relatable, was how no matter how upset they were, no matter how tormented or grief-stricken or whatever, there was something about the sort of, I guess, the eternity of nature, but just like how beautiful, like walking out in nature and the natural world was not a cure. But it was something that you could always rely on to be there for you. You know, it was something that no matter how up everything was, you could walk out into a mountain and just be like, I feel small now and it's good. You know, and that was like, it's the only place that I found Victor at all relatable. I think it's something that he very much shares with the creature. And I think probably is intended, at least, I mean, yeah, we can argue about the degree to which that's Shelley, Shelley,
which Shelley,
which one's
yes.
Mary. But I felt it underlay some of the themes of the narrative in a way that meant it didn't feel worthless to me. And a lot of it I felt also was going towards the establishment of Victor's character as somebody who's, I guess, quite self-absorbed. I think it played into the unreliable narration in the sense that, like, to quote a Jedi, your focus determines your reality, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that those are the things that he chooses to focus on tells you something about who he is as a person and what's important to him. And the fact, I don't know. I've got a lot of time for both the narration and the natural world aspect of it.
Maybe the problem here is that I didn't care about who Victor was as a person because I found him very boring and arrogant.
I mean, that's valid.
I think also, like, I was thinking when I was reading this is the first book I've read which has language like this, which I would only have used if I was doing a creative writing piece at school. You know, all the books we read at school didn't have this language and this level of sort of fully yourselfness of that Victor is a clearly well-educated, very privileged man in this society that he can afford to take his time, and not take his time, but like to he's not in a rush, and so that kind of that for me came across in the language.
Yeah.
But the thing that made it the hardest to listen, because I was listening to an audiobook, to listen to was not the story itself. I think it's just purely because of Plague TM and just everything associated with that. Listening to a book that is where the main narrator is quite miserable a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's not great.
Quite difficult to then think about like the nuances of the story. I think if I'd read this not in this current climate, I probably would have hit the I made a note, like I probably appreciate the nuance of the book a lot more and the themes of the book, kind of similar to how when I first read, say, Pride and Prejudice, for example. It's a quote-unquote classic novel, it's a happy novel, but you can understand the underlying themes of marriage and family and blah 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 and all those kind of things that you'd pick up if you read a Spark Notes. Whereas this, I was just like, please just stop whining. Please stop whining. This is entirely your fault, mate. Like, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe if you didn't abandon your child, because, like, all newborns are ugly. Just get over it.
I just can't understand how also that made me really sad because he spent so long. I mean, I did a STEM degree. If you spent that long on an experiment, you're just going to go, oh, f this, it's ugly, I'm leaving. Like, I don't understand how we can just spend so long making this human-like creature and then just animate it and go, oh, nah, I can't be arsed. You know, it's ugly, I'm leaving. Which also, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, is the fact the creature's ugly. Like, for me, that the theme...
It's the uncanny valley.
Yeah, it's like the creature, when you get to the creature's narrative, like you do empathise with the creature because he's talking about how he's living next to the cottage and trying to help the poor family, and then kind of how he sort of descends into this, into this state of mind purely because of the way he's treated, which is he brings back at the end when he eventually kills Victor on the boat. He's like, oh, I was treated so badly and I used to be happy.
Well, he doesn't kill him. Victor dies of illness.
Oh, nope, well, I missed that bit. I thought he killed him. Anyway, you can identify where I zoned out by that end of the book, can't you?
But yeah, I mean, so the thing about him being ugly is you do see earlier, like not that much earlier in the book, Victor being like, well, this one of my professors is ugly and he has bad physiognomy, and so I'm not going to pay as much attention to him, and I'm going to go to the other one who has a nice voice. And it's just this sort of this shallowness and this like, I mean, yes, he's like what 20 at this point, if that. So yeah, he's a piece of garbage because most 20-year-olds are. But like it's this shallowness that he's not ready to be responsible for having created a life, and he doesn't really understand that that's what he's doing when he does it.
No. There's a complete lack of accountability, isn't it? There's a couple of moments where he's like, I did feel that, like, I had a duty to the creature because, I was responsible for its existence and thus I owed it happiness. But in the same breath, he'll be like, but the creature was inherently evil, so I didn't owe it anything. And honestly, I owed more to, like, my fellow, like, the rest of the human race to protect them from this evil than I did to the creature that I created. It's a lot.
Yeah. And, like, compare and contrast, how would he have, if he had, like, a child with he later marries this sister, Elizabeth. And, like, I mean, how is it different? I mean, obviously that's a really obvious question to ask about this book, but, like, what makes it different from birthing a child in the way that humans have done since there have been humans, Yeah. You've created life, you're responsible for it, for its education, for its welfare, for its protection, to prevent it from being a monster that inflicts pain upon the world. You have just as much responsibility for that if you have a child that's born in the usual way, right?
Yeah.
And just because it doesn't look how you thought when you in a way that is entirely your fault, doesn't mean you don't have those responsibilities. Anyway, I hate Victor Frankenstein. He's a bad parent.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say it was something that I think there was a line quite late in the book where Victor talks about being the slave of the monster and the monster having all these needs and that it and being never satisfied and being this, like, tyrant over his
just
destiny.
like a child.
And no, it's interesting because part of what this is a horror story about is it's a horror story of parenthood.
Yeah.
Right? If you conceive of children as being inherently other to yourself and you can't understand them, you can't reason with them, they don't have a sense of proportion and context for the things that they experience, so their reactions to everything are very extreme. Like, on some level, it's about actually the kind of creating life is maybe a little bit monstrous.
It's a bit eldritch, yeah.
Actually, what if just reproducing human beings is just generally horrible and has a horror aspect?
Well, and also should be taken really seriously. Yeah. I mean, there's I've seen some of the similar arguments made in terms of, like, obviously AI is a sort of becoming a more prominent theme in modern horror, right? Because the idea that you could create something that's a person, but in a way that we don't understand, which is essentially what the creature is as well, right?
And also that's more powerful than you, I think, is the other thing that's really, because that's the other thing that kind of delineates, like, why the monster does so much harm, the creature does so much harm, even though he's not that different to Frankenstein in terms of the way he reacts to things, The reason that he does so much more harm is because he has all this strength at his disposal and he doesn't have the understanding of how to moderate that or whether or not he should. And I think that's a similar anxiety that people have with AI and possibly even with their own kids. I don't know. It's completely unrelatable to me. But, like, the idea that they're going to supplant you in some sense, that one day they will not need you anymore and they will be stronger than you and better than you, and then you are suddenly unnecessary to them.
And you don't have power over them anymore. They get to a point where you being the person who created them isn't enough to make them listen to you anymore.
I think one interesting thing though is like, I think if you see it on, the Tumblr, it's, the wise know that Frankenstein is the monster. Victor Frankenstein is a monster. Yeah. Like, the fact that, say, in another Gothic book we read earlier on, Dracula, again, the only, comparing the two books I've read in the Gothic genre, like, the Dracula is sort of an other. So he is a monster because he is an other. He is unhuman. Whereas this book, let's be honest, being read by probably quite a lot of privileged men who were in Victor's position are... Like, it would be very interesting to sort of get that person's point of view, because obviously reading it now as a modern reader, you're not getting, like, I can't empathise with that at all. But, like, at the time, it must have been read by people who were in Victor's position, and Victor is the monster. Victor is a monster, and they're going, am I like this? Like,
no, I don't think they are, though.
I don't know.
That's the thing. I think that there's two stories happening here, isn't there? There's the story that Victor thinks is happening, where he is being unjustly punished for pushing the boundaries of science, and he didn't do anything wrong, and he has to exterminate the creature because it's the only way to save the rest. And only he can do it, only he can save the rest of humankind from this monstrous other that he's created. And he thinks he's right. And Walton thinks he's right. And even the monster, walking off at the end of the book to self-immolate in the Arctic, believes that Frankenstein was right at the end. Okay. He calls him generous and noble, and he's sorry that he's dead, and which is a very Victor thing to do. Is I pursued this thing in passion, and now I hate the consequences, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just going to self-destruct. But
I guess after, because that's after Victor's died, isn't it? So the person writing that up would be
It's Walton, yeah.
Walton.
Who was in love with Frankenstein. He met him once and was just oh, he's my best friend ever. He's the brother I wish I had.
Yeah, and which is also quite a bit bizarre, to be honest. I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, where I was kind of going with that line of argument was that I think if you are somebody in Victor Frankenstein's position, so social, gender-wise, race-wise, class-wise, whatever, in, at the time that this book was published, I think it's very likely that you would read this and assume that, and take it at face value. I think you would read it and go, oh, Frankenstein was right, actually. And it would just be a straight up, I believe this unreliable narrator because this tallies with my experience of the world. And I think if you're anybody else potentially reading this, you're going, oh, this is actually what having entitled young jackasses running the world who don't have to account for themselves to anybody, and who the consequences of their actions never fall on their heads directly. Yeah. This is what they can do with untrammeled access to science and knowledge, and it's a science without ethics. This is what this is what they do. And I think if you I think there's this story is happening on levels, and I think there is a very strong chance that the majority of people who were reading it in Victor's position are taking it at face value and just going, and I think that's potentially why it has the legacy that it does, where people are if they call the creature the monster, and it's the monster's Frankenstein, all of this blah 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 blah, instead of being no, actually Victor is just as culpable. And a lot of the ways in which the creature is monstrous are personality traits that Victor shares with the creature.
Definitely.
And is directly responsible for encouraging in the monster with the creature.
Yes.
So there's this line which is attributed to the book, but is actually from an adaptation, which is, it goes something along the lines of I have love in thee, the likes of which you could scarcely imagine, and fury, the likes of which you would not believe. If I cannot satisfy the one, I'll indulge the other. And that's from the Kenneth Branagh 94 adaptation of this. And it's this, so the monster's whole thing is that as soon as anybody shows me kindness, I have vast swathes of kindness and love in my heart to bestow upon them, right? But because not a single person has done so, I'm a monster. It really reminds me also of this bit, we were talking about this earlier, Em and I, in Black Sails, which is a show that I very much love, but it's about narrative, basically, and there's this one character who says, everybody's a monster to someone. Since you are so convinced that I am yours, I will be it. And he's voluntarily taking on that role of being a monster because it's all that he's being allowed to be. And so if that's what he's been given, he'll do it.
Which I love this as an origin of that kind of that villain moment of oh, I'm the bad guy. All right, I'll be the bad guy,
Yeah.
Which I like. I've got to say, though, the conversation in which that comes up in the book, which is the conversation in the mountains above.
When he's pleading for a wife.
That was the place, I think, at which it struck me that they are both wrong about what's happening in the exact same way. Because the monster's oh, I keep calling him that, and I don't mean to, because I think calling him the creature is probably more valid. But anyway, the creature says, look, what I'm going to ask of you is that you create me a mate. I want a friend. Can you?
I want a companion.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the way that he says it tells you that he has exactly the same people as things character flaw as Victor. Because what is he asking for if not, I would like a peasant girl that has no choice but to depend on me because everybody else is going to shun her and leave her alone. I want somebody who has no choice
but to be with me.
But to be with me and be my friend, as a gift.
That's exactly what Yennefer wants in The Witcher, actually.
Yes.
Make a gift for me, please. Make a woman as a gift. And I think that is something that where you kind of go, and they're both talking past each other at that point. Neither of them understands neither of them, they're talking past each other. Like, the monster's like, if I have a wife, it will fix everything. And Frankenstein's like, you're inherently evil. Frankenstein refuses to acknowledge the nurture aspect of this whole thing, right? He's like, I think you're inherently evil, and I can't risk that the woman that I create for you would also be inherently evil and then procreate with you and thus overrun the earth, which is, there's horrible vibes there.
It's like Victor's kind of, like you say, I think it is quite interesting though that even say, just pulling it up on the Wikipedia page, that even only 10 years after it was published, that people were associating the name Frankenstein with the creature and calling the creature a monster, which is a very interesting thought, because nowhere in this book is the creature called... He's called a monster. He does monstrous things, but it's not like the monster. That is the monster. Yeah. He's a monster in the same way that a person can be, like a regular person could be a monster. You are a monster if you kill someone, you know? He's a creature who does monstrous things, but he's not described as the monster or Frankenstein. And he's described as enemy and things like that.
A fallen angel.
And those things that Em was talking about, that like both Victor and the creature display these sort of character traits. I think it's quite interesting that now in pop culture, you say the name Frankenstein, people think of the creature. They don't think of Victor. They think of the mad scientist and Frankenstein, the monster. The monster, not Victor Frankenstein, who made a creature. And also that just to make myself feel better about things I've achieved, TM, that she started writing this when she was 18 and first published when she was 20. And I'm like, oh, Christ, what have I achieved? But it's also quite another fun fact. It says it should be considered the first true science fiction story, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah. Some people argue for Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World as well, but like this is a pretty...
Is that the one with the dirigible?
I don't know.
Anyway, there is one where it's like somebody goes on a dirigible to the moon, and I thought that was one of the first. Anyway.
I mean, this is just what the Wikipedia page is telling me, so...
I think that's a joke in Cyrano de Bergerac, actually.
What, going on a dirigible
to the moon in a dirigible thing.
I wish that were possible.
I was going to say, actually, thinking about what Lottie was saying about how the creature isn't a monster, the creature is a person or a creature that does monstrous things. It was really interesting to me, the occasional offhand references to colonization and empire at the edges of this novel, in the sense of, if you want to talk monstrosity, the fact that is hovering in the background throughout was very interesting to me.
And what would Mary Shelley's take, like, would that have been intentional on her part? What was the anti-colonialist movement? What was that like at the time?
Well, this is the thing that I'm kind of trying to reckon with, because the thing is, so I think there's two references to the wiping out of indigenous people in the Americas, and one reference to, and this is the point at which I fell out of love with Clerval, right? I was like, Clerval might be a decent dude, actually, and then he's like, my greatest ambition is to use my knowledge of India to assist with the European colonization there, and you're like, okay, die in a fire now. Yeah. But both of the references to... Okay, there's one reference early on, I think it's in his rant about how you can always tell if you're doing something wrong because you let all your bonds of affection lapse, and those are the most important thing. And one of the examples that he gives is what happened in the Americas, essentially. And then there's a reference later to the hapless natives of that troubled land or something, which very much implies that it's simply misfortune, right? So it's like... There's this sense of like, there's some tragic happening over there, but there's no sense of it being a deliberate attempt at genocide, so I don't know. The short answer is I don't know what the popular, like one assumes that, like with slavery, there were always people who were going actually, this is fucked up, actually.
Actually, this is unjustifiable.
Like, whether the ways they went about expressing that and dealing with it are, you know, like, did that ever go anywhere? Did it make a difference in any way? Yeah. But, it's kind of unclear, but there's, like, definitely, like, for example, there are bits in Walton's narration where he's talking about, you know, being the first living being to set foot in these untrammeled wastes and undiscovered countries. That is very, you know, people live in the Arctic,
No, is
right?
that before or after he buys clothes from some people that are just living there?
Yeah, like, people live there. Real, actual people live there.
And they've been living there for a long time.
It reminded me a bit of, actually, that earlier narration reminded me of the Terror, actually.
Oh, I need to see that.
There was a post going around on Tumblr about how, like, they're all like, we are, like, resorting to cannibalism and dying and being picked off by supernatural entities, and there's an indigenous character there who's just vibing.
Who's just like, you guys want some help? Or, and like the Donner Party, the white people are just like, be gone, demon.
I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know, but
no,
I mean,
it's,
just completely. I mean, I just because I saw it in the news like 2 days ago that there was just a date the recording of this episode where in Australia there was like an indigenous tracker found a child, like within a few days over, say, a helicopter and a infrared camera, which I thought was quite cool. It's like, it's like you can't just describe the Arctic as this sort of place where it's undiscovered and there's no one there. And he, like, the guy just comes across so pretentious. I think, like you said, this unreliable narrator where you could tell why Arctic guy, I can't remember his name.
Walton,
there we go. I will remember it by the end of the episode. Walton sort of vibes with Victor because Walton is like, I'm going to go explore the Arctic to do a thing, to make my name in history because that's what I do. And then Victor's
I am going to risk all the people on this boat who've asked me to please let us turn back so that we won't all die.
He's like, no, I must continue my quest. It's like, piss off. And then Victor, like, they find this emancipated Victor, and Victor's like, oh, let me tell you my story of woe and miserableness because I created a creature. And then Walton's like, my God, this is the gold mine. I love this guy. And I just imagine him just sort of sitting here with, like, you know that gif of the child where they've got their hands under their chin? Like, oh, I'm loving it. Like, it just...
Yeah.
They're very, very similar to each other.
This is why I said he was a mirror to Frankenstein. He's completely obsessed with this wacky goal, and he's willing to do stupid things in order to get there and endanger other people, and, you know...
I mean, I was going to say, actually, I was going to cast my hat in for a title for this episode as Frankenstein and the Frankensteinettes. Because every single narrator that we have, I love how I'm just going to yell briefly about narrative structure, and then we can get on to, like, who do you fight and but it's very interesting to me that we get this nested, inward-looking narration, right? A series of 3 unreliable narrators who, it's all turned inwards towards the monster, right? There's no external perspective. It's not like Dracula where you get your newspaper clippings and pretty much everybody that's a main character writes a letter at some point, or, you know, we get notes from their journal.
We never hear directly from Elizabeth in this, for example.
Yeah, we never hear directly from Elizabeth. We never hear directly from Henry. We never hear directly from Frankenstein's mother. The only people we ever hear from in this narrative are people who are either Frankenstein or a type of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And I think that I love the way that plays into this repeated theme of them isolating themselves from society and from community. And they haven't had all their rough edges knocked off by being around other people.
Well, I would argue in the creature's case he did his best, right?
Well, and this is why I would argue that the only real difference between Frankenstein and the creature is that the creature isn't hot as shit.
Ha!
Right? That's the advantage that he literally states it at one point. The advantages that Victor has that he's lacking are property, good looks, and reputation, right? He's essentially saying what I lack is privilege, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason that, you know, it's easy to cast him as the monster and to throw him from society, and Frankenstein gets to stay and be looked after and...
cast as a noble hero.
You know, fated by other people. Because it's essentially because he's pretty and he has money.
Even though he got his entire family killed.
Yeah. It's easier to get... It's easier to cast the blame onto, like in this case, the creature gets the blame because they're expecting the creature to be the blame, to be the one who's done this, just purely before the creature starts killing people. Purely, they're making these assumptions on the way the creature looks, and then with Victor, they're saying, like you say, they've got the same character traits, but because Victor has this privilege and he looks handsome and he's
insulated from the consequences of his actions.
He doesn't have that people are not making those immediate assumptions about him.
And I would like to say also about the creature, he is smarter than Frankenstein, I would argue. He self-taught language from scratch. He's well-read, despite not having, he has continually, like during the time when he's staying near this cottage with the DeLacy family, continually seeking to better himself and to be a good person and to understand and to communicate and to, try and be helpful to these people who owe him, who he doesn't owe anything. They, and eventually they cast him out and they're cruel to him. But and he's smarter. Like Frankenstein's like great sort of character trait, his sort of redeeming thing is that he's so smart and so good at science and whatever. And the monster is more that than him, and it still doesn't redeem the monster or creature, right? It's still not enough. It really does lay bare that what differentiates the two are superficial things.
Yeah. It was kind of a wild ride for me because I was expecting to sympathize with the creature. God damn it! I was expecting to sympathize with the creature more than I did end up, and it plays into some that like I think maybe you get as a I don't know, any member of a marginalized group, right? Where you've got a lot of anger about the way that you're treated and the way the world sees you and how these things aren't under your control necessarily. And it worries me a little that kind of, I think this is why I struggle with it, because I'm kind of like reflexively at the creature, like, oh, somebody was mean to you once and now you're going to destroy humanity? Calm down, eat some chocolate, grow up.
Everybody struggles with identity in the mortifying ordeal of being known. Let's get you some vitamin C. Like,
yeah, exactly. But at the same time, like, if I had the only difference, but I don't have the power to do what the monster does, right? That's kind of the difference, is that I don't.
And that's why Black Sails works, because he has the power.
There is almost nothing I can do that when people upset me in that way, or people treat other me or whatever, there's nothing I can do about it. That's half of my rage, is that like there's nothing I can say to my manager, oh, this guy's making transphobic jokes and I hate it or whatever. At the end of the day, that doesn't change very much.
You can't burn his house down.
Actually, like that person is not going to hurt the way that I've hurt about this.
Yeah.
But the monster, on a whim, because he is extremely strong, can just be like, I will reach out. I have the power to like make the people that hurt me hurt, and then he does. And I'd like to say that I wouldn't, right? If I had institutionalized power or I was extremely strong or whatever, I'd like to think in that position I would be able to say, actually, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go eye for eye about this. But I don't know that I would, because I've never been in a position where I've been strong enough to, or powerful enough maybe, to lash out back in a way that has any meaningful impact.
Well, I wonder if this story can be read as well, and there's probably really good essays and stuff about this, as reflecting on the fear of what would happen if marginalised groups could.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that's another thing with the artificial intelligence, isn't it? Is because we create, the idea is that we create them to be our servants. Yeah. And then they decide that they don't want to. And it's the same thing.
And the fear that we would deserve whatever they did.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You get it with patriarchy, where like men are afraid of feminism because they know that patriarchy is wrong, and they assume that what feminism is arguing for is a matriarchy and not equality. They just have no idea of what equality looks like.
Well, I saw a really powerful slogan. So it was during like a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests last year, where somebody was carrying a placard that said, like, feel lucky that what we're asking for is justice and not revenge. You know? Yeah. But the monster is seeking revenge. And it's hard to argue that he's wrong to do so. I mean, obviously it's wrong to, like, you know, kill children and all of that, but his actual motives aren't inherently, you know, immediately condemnable, right? And that's where a lot of this complexity comes from. I
mean, this is the thing, another thing that he shares with Frankenstein, right, is that he goes to immediate extremes. It's like, somebody hit me with a stick, so now I'm going to burn down their house and kill all of mankind. And it's like...
Yeah, to be fair, they're not in the house at the time.
Yeah, no, I know. I think that, but like, it is, you know, he has extreme responses to things.
Yeah, but also the creature doesn't, I guess he doesn't have those learned experiences where he can restrain himself. I say restrain himself.
Yeah, exactly. Word. I mean, this is the thing that he's lacking, and it's something that society teaches you, but also age. Yeah. There's the sense of proportion to these things, and the kind of being able to contextualize them. It's that when you're a kid, every bad thing that happens to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, because it is.
It literally is, because nothing's happened to you yet.
And one of the things that, like, maybe we look to our relationships with community and with with adults is that sense of proportion. For them to tell us, look, you've got this twisted. I know that this feels really bad right now, but it will have its place and you'll be okay. It will have its place. It's not as big as you think it is. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's not going to have... It feels awful, but it's not going to have the consequences that you think... That like, you know, it's not the end of the world in the way that you think it is, and that's okay. Like...
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, we were going to talk about who you should fight.
Oh, wait, yeah, I was going to say, like, who... Because, who would you want to fight? I mean,
everybody.
Everybody.
I mean, there's a really obvious answer in Victor Frankenstein, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know if you can read this book and not want to fight him.
Hit him with the wet fish reality.
I want to fight all of them. There is not a
Oh.
single character in here that I don't want to fight.
Even Elizabeth, to be honest, she's annoying.
Like, even Elizabeth and Justine to an extent, because they do just kind of go, oh... I mean, this isn't their fault. This is because of, again, unreliable narrators refusing to allow women to be people, because I think they both very much fit the virgin of the virgin whore dichotomy.
Yes.
Do they have personality at all? Do they ever get angry about anything? Like, what are their opinions on things?
Elizabeth does get angry. Elizabeth basically goes on a tangent rant lecture sermon about the death penalty while Justine is there. And it's just a really jarring moment where Mary Shelley just like, by the way, Mary Shelley is against the death penalty, did you know?
Yeah. I mean, that comes up a couple of times, but yeah.
Just like shoehorn that in. What do you think the rating the cat would give this book?
Interesting. I think she would struggle to relate because she is told every single day that she's loved and beautiful. Unlike the creature, right?
Yeah.
So
she has supportive family and loving family.
Exactly, which obviously, you know. Mind you, Frankenstein had a loving family, and he waxes lyrical about them for the first 2 chapters of this book, and he still turned out like an absolute mess, so...
Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, like, a lot of this book follows the motto of, aren't you tired of being nice, don't you just want to go ape shit? And I feel like the cat would support that to a degree.
Yeah, I think she'd give it like a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I was going to say 5 or 6.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Like, there is murder. It's not very satisfying murder. It's not the murder of people who've actually done things, but it is still, like, killing and violence. So, you know, she's down with that, obviously.
She commits crime.
I mean, basically everybody involved is like, what if I've solved my problems with violence and grave robbery? And
keeping secrets as well. Yeah. There are lots of secrets.
It's going into the isolation thing again. But
yeah.
6 out of 10 for this book from the cat, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Do we have time to do what else are we reading?
Probably very quickly.
I'm not reading anything because this book consumed my life. I procrastinated reading it until last night by reading f*** all else.
I'm still working my way through the life-changing magic of tidying.
Nice.
But I am planning to like actually get started on putting it into practice this afternoon, maybe.
Exciting. I mean, I've just been watching a load of like YouTube and Channel 4's The Circle and Line of Duty. That is basically all I've been doing. Although I did try and make some shortbread, misread the recipe, and utterly failed and caramelized it in the oven because I forgot to chill it.
Was it still tasty though?
It's good. If you sort of ignore the fact it's meant to be a shortbread biscuit, it's all right. Like, but it
edible is a success in my book. Yeah. But I'm very bad at baking, so my standards are very low.
It was just like I made a really nice cake, and then the shortbread just went all wrong. But anyway, I tried.
Lottie getting into quarantine baking like a year after.
I didn't do it last year. I made a lot of homemade pasta last year. Now this year...
I was going to say, I got so many Snapchats of homemade pasta last year.
Oh my goodness.
This year it's on the shortbread. But I think, we probably should wrap up this episode, shouldn't we? Eli, do you want to say what we're reading next time?
Next time we are reading Lirael, the second book in the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix. So we did Sabriel ages ago. And now we're finally moving on to the sequel, and I'm really excited because I love this book and I love the main character and I love the dog, and lots of stuff we'll get to talk about next time.
Yay. So yeah, if you want to like scroll down through previous episodes, I think Sabriel's like episode 6 or 7, one of the two. So yeah, go and have a listen. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Please follow us. I think Apple Podcasts got rid of the subscribe button, so it's follow, not subscribe. And please give us a review. Add us on, what are we on? Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, Tumblr. All the social medias.
Yeah, check out the Tumblr. The Tumblr's awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, if you want to recommend us a book for us to read, go check out our website, teachingmycattoread.wordpress.com. We've got a contact page. And so just send us a message on that. Yeah, so say hello, send us a message, and recommend us some books to read. Big virtual hugs, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Bye!